This is an AMI podcast.
In the spring, at the end of the day, you should smell like dirt. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, where we talk all things audiobooks on this weekly podcast. I'm your host, Ramya Amuddin, here with Nisreen Abdelmajid, and a familiar author, hopefully, that gave us this quote today. It's from a book called Bluebeard's Egg by Margaret Atwood. Kind of a nice, hands-on quote, if you know what I mean. People thinking about gardening, people thinking about outdoors, and of course with April, the last day of April, actually, that this podcast is being released, we are thinking spring, and with the weather, with the things that we're doing, going outdoors, starting to smell that bloom in the air, the freshness and the dirt. So that's what's really interesting about it. Thought we'd bring it back full circle. Can't wait to give you the theme for our May quotes, by the way. I've already thought it out, Niz, but I haven't said it out loud yet. So it's going to be fun to surprise you all. So let's move on to the SELA homepage. We'll have to check out the featured titles list, second heading, and this is at selalibrary.ca. We're still working with the same titles from the last couple of weeks. Daughters of the Deer by Danielle Daniel. This is a historical fiction. We also have Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley, family and relationships category, and the last one on this category, or this featured list, is Moonwitch, Spider King by Marlon James. Fantasy. Talked a couple different fantasy books throughout the month, so love to get that in as well. And Nisreen, you have what's trending. So what's going on in the audiobook world?
So audiobooks.com tweeted out this week's top releases, starting off with Finding Me, a memoir by Viola Davis, City on Fire by Dawn Winslow, An Honest Lie, Taryn Fisher. We're moving to One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose, and I'll Be You, a novel by Janelle Brown. And the last one I'll mention is Unmasked by Paul Holes. And I expected a more lighter list, Ramya, because I feel like the transition to spring, I mean, we're already in spring. It doesn't feel like it, but the transition to spring, I just feel like it should have been a lighter list. But these are heavy, heavy books.
Yeah, biographies, right? Some of them biographies, memoirs,
Yeah,
that kind of
lots
thing,
of
real life
memoirs.
accounts. I'm thinking too, in general, I'm seeing an upward trend in not in the release of memoirs. Obviously, that is an old tale, but people picking up these celebrity and influencer memoirs, and people coming out with more and more candid stories and life accounts, because I'm not sure if we're just more open to hearing about these things because we're all in vulnerable places ourselves. That's the way I connect to it. You know, I'm way more willing to read nonfiction, to read what's going on with other people's lives and how that comes back into my own experiences and mental health, just because in the last couple of years, we've all experienced such deep knowledge of ourselves. We've gone to such deep places in exploring our own realities. And so it's interesting to tap into somebody else's. What do you think is going on?
It is interesting. I kind of agree where you feel like there's more vulnerable books now because people can tolerate it and people are more interested in these vulnerable books because we can relate to them. That kind of makes sense. I feel like that makes sense. For the past 2 years, that's been a main genre, right? Talking about
self-development.
self-reflection, self-development, mental health. These are big, heavy topics. And you know what? I feel like you're right where people are just more comfortable to reading those than lighter books, for example. Even though I was expecting lighter adventurous books in my transition to the warmer weather. That's just who I am. But yeah, that's a good perspective to look at.
Yeah, and you've heard both, right? People who've said, I'm really tired of the serious talk. I'm really becoming exhausted or overwhelmed by news and reality and things going on all around the world. And I want that escape, or I want to get into a fantasy realm where I don't have to hit play on something real. So I can understand that side of the equation as well. But realistically, we are becoming more prone to talking about diversity, talking about things that are going on in the world, regardless of you wanting to cover your ears or not, put your fingers in your ears. You are probably getting a bigger blast of that kind of stuff. And going back to the point about diversity, more people are sharing more of what they may not have been able to share, let's say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So things that were super, super hard for them, that is real for them, but maybe they didn't think that it would be a good time to share it. I'll go back to my reading Will Smith's novel, Will,
Mhm.
self narrated memoir. And some of the things I was reading is, I mean, if I read that 5 years ago, I'd be way more judgmental, way more critical on the things that he shared. But now, because we've gone over such a delicate time frame, I was more interested, more intrigued, and honestly just more forgiving, like less judgmental on things that he had gone through, things that he was basically confessing, character traits, et cetera, et cetera. I felt like he was talking very sensitive stuff that still
Mhm.
could be, other people could reflect on themselves.
You know what? I understand that. I feel like a lot of people are open to speaking their minds more. And I was just talking about how podcasts lately have just been people just speaking their minds. They don't care who's listening, and they're speaking
Oh, yeah.
their truth, what they consider their truth. And it kind of relates to this, where there's so many memoirs, there's so many heavy books that people can tolerate, people can not judge too quickly, and they have more perspective, different perspectives on these novels and these biographies. So it's an interesting turn, don't you think?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I think so. I think having more free speech, free expression, but also just being able to put your own story out there, there's definitely the good and the ugly with doing that. But regardless of how you feel about it, I think it's trending upwards for sure.
Yeah, it never used to be
Cool.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, nowadays we're becoming more open. Absolutely. This is AMI Audiobook Review. So we're talking audiobooks. Let's get into pause or play. I'm going to give you a little bit of a synopsis of a book that intrigued me. This time it's not one of the ones from the featured list on Sela, but it is something I found on Sela, and I'm intrigued to hear your reaction in response to it. It's called Consuming History, Historians and Heritage in Contemporary Popular Culture. It's written by Jerome Groot, was released in 2016, and here we go. Consuming History examines how history works in contemporary popular culture, analyzing a wide range of contemporary cultural entities, from computer games to daytime television. It investigates the ways in which society consumes history and how a reading of this consumption can help us understand popular culture and issues of representation. Jerome Groot probes how museums have responded to the heritage debate and how new technologies, from online gameplay to internet genealogy, have brought about a shift in access to history. Discussing the often conflicted relationship between public and academic history and raising important questions about the theory and practice of history as a discipline. This book contains examples from sources such as Wolf Hall, Game of Thrones, and 12 Years a Slave. It considers new groundbreaking texts and media, such as YouTube, in addition to entities and practices such as reenactment that have been around but underrepresented in historical discussion thus far. Consuming History offers an essential path through the debates for readers interested in history, cultural studies, and the media. Going around the table, as we always do with pause or play, would you hit it on this book or not? Nizreen, coming to you.
I think I would hit it. I would give it a chance. I'm not used to listening to history books or even reading history books back in the day. It was only for school. But since it includes media and different cultures added to it, maybe I'd give it a chance. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, because it's like not even just the history, but the analysis of history, which is kind of interesting.
Hmm.
Greg, pause or play?
I loved the cynicism in Nisreen's voice when she said history. Yeah, I absolutely check this out. I would definitely hit it. You said you had me from the word history. I'm a huge history buff. And then it really interested me to hear about the fact that like Game of Thrones or Wolf Hall, which is actually a book
Yeah.
that I'm looking into buying, the trilogy. I was just checking that out the other day. That's where I get really excited as well. So I'm a fan of history, but love to hear it, with the modern day take of media being worked into the story as well.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
nice. There's a
exactly.
modern touch to it.
Yeah.
Pretty much, right? There's just like the how we're doing it, how we think of history. Do we even care about it? Do we understand the representations of legitimate history? I love the concept of like academic versus public history, because that's a huge one for somebody
Mhm.
who's all the time looking into things, and the resonance of history in everything they consume, versus someone like me who's like, oh, that's nice, I didn't even realize. Is is such a difference, like a vast spectrum of how we delve into it. But definitely the part about pop culture, which seems to be a huge portion of this book, the way that pop culture explores history, even in, I'm just going to put my own take in there, even in futuristic things or dystopian things, I think would be a real fascinating things to analyze. So this is Consuming History, Historians and Heritage in Contemporary Popular Culture by Jerome D. Groot. You can find this on Sela, as I said. And now we move on to checking in with our reader, our guest of the day, opening up the space to review, discuss, recommend, browse, conceptualize, and reminisce on audiobooks, sometimes with a new member to the audiobook community. I wanted to kind of preface that. We welcome in Greg David, who's our communication specialist here at AMI. And Greg, you read books. That's
Yes.
not the question here. Yeah, you also watch a lot of TV, but how many books do you typically get through? Let's say in a week or a month, however you time frame it.
Oh, that's a great question because I kind of go in spurts. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time on social media, way too much time. So it's sometimes hard to just kind of like, okay, Greg, put your phone down and pick up a book. But I probably, if I'm right into the book, I will, start it and finish it in the same weekend. It depends on how thick the book is, but that's generally, if I get into it, then I will consume it. I'm not one of those people that have 3 or 4 books on the go. I find that too confusing. I need to focus myself. So yeah, and for the about, again, it depends on if I get into a groove or not. But I could probably will read probably 10 to 15 books a year, maybe.
Nice. And if you binged a book in a weekend, right? And then it was part of a trilogy or a series, would you get right into the next book, or do you need to pause?
Oh, wow. I've never even thought about that before because I've never been in that situation. I think I would probably continue on.
Okay. All right.
Kind of like with
Um,
Netflix, right? When that new episode pops up, you just have to keep on going.
you have to keep going. And that's why it's hard to wait the whole week, right? It's better to wait till the whole season's over and just like grit your teeth and get into it afterwards. Greg, so you hear us talking about audiobooks all the time, and you finally got the chance to try one yourself. So technically, this is your first audiobook listen, and we're here to get the real-time scoop on how it went for you. So what platform did you experiment with, first of all?
So I'm an Amazon Prime subscriber, and for the longest time, I've gotten those emails saying, "Hey, you have access to Audible, and you get 2 credits for free, and then it's whatever the monthly fee is after that." So, when you asked me about being on, I thought, "Oh, this is a perfect opportunity for me to try out
Mm-hmm.
Audible for the very first time." And I'm cited. If you didn't get that from the fact that I read books, I am cited. So I thought this was a really unique opportunity for me to enter it and have this discussion. So, coming from the standpoint of already paying Amazon Prime. I mean, I'm not paying. I wasn't going to be paying extra for Audible, but I think it's $14.95. But anyway, so the first book that I downloaded is I'm a Stephen King fan, and I have been since I was 11 years old when I read Cujo. And so I thought, okay, let's go at it from the angle of I've just spent much of my life reading the books myself and having the voice in my head. So what's it like going at Audible where it's somebody else's voice reading a book that I love back to me? And that's when I decided to pick The Dead Zone, which is one of my favorite Stephen King books ever. It was written in 1979 or came out in 1979. And so when I went over to Audible, and I'll also preface this by saying that Stephen King books are available on Sela. I checked that beforehand. So just so you know, The Dead Zone and other books are available there. But when I went over to The Dead Zone and downloaded it from Audible, James Franco is the narrator. So this is really interesting because there used to be a gentleman that narrated Stephen King's books early on, and now there have been a lot of actors and actresses. So Will Patton is a well-known name. He's an actor who's narrated a bunch of Stephen King's books. And I was going at it from, I like the book, but now do I like the voice? And it's weird because it's James Franco. You know, you Google him and you watch the movies, and now all of a sudden he's reading a beloved book in my head. And while I liked it, he was putting emphasis on words that I didn't put emphasis on when I was reading the book in my head. So that was
I gotta
really
pause
kind
you
of,
there.
yeah.
Does this also come from, because we hear your voice on AMI. You come on Kelly and Company every other week to talk television. You get on Now with Dave Brown, the morning show. So you're also pretty familiar with voice work yourself. So
Right.
when you say he's emphasizing words that I wouldn't, does that also pop into your head? Like, the way that I've been reading it with the voice in my head is a particular way, even in the performance aspect.
Yeah, I think so, because we all picture a
Ah.
voice in our heads when we're reading something, right? Like it's not when I don't think when I'm reading, I'm listening in like Greg's voice and Rami, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like I don't know whether it's my own voice that I'm hearing in my head when I'm reading something. So to have somebody else's voice in my head reading those words that I know so well was definitely a learning curve for me. And it was a little bit jarring at first.
Wow. Okay, and how long did that last you? Because you decided to go with the book.
Yeah.
You picked your favorite book. There's no way you're gonna be like, oh no, I hate it, and then put it down. I mean, that to me would be tragic. To pick your favorite book, go into audiobook and say this was the worst ever. I shouldn't have done this.
Yeah, it's still a little bit of. I've gotten used to it. I've gotten used to James Franco's delivery. I think that's also part of it too. I listened to a couple of the samples because you can do that before you actually purchase
Sure.
the book. And there were certain voices that right from the get-go, I thought, okay, I don't like that. I listened to tons of podcasts, and it doesn't take long for me to decide to not subscribe or to unsubscribe to a podcast than the person's voice. I think you and I can both agree on that the person's voice in you is so important that if you don't have a connection with them, then you're out. So it took me a while for me to get used to James Franco and the way that he was speaking, but now I'm all in. But the interesting thing about it is that there are times where he doesn't read with, I think, enough emotion. There isn't enough of an up and down and a lilt in his voice when he's delivering some of the lines. In some cases, they're quite monotone. So that still is a little bit jarring and takes me out of the experience a little bit anyway.
Right. So with Stephen King, I mean, he has such a pronounced way of writing, right? And that's not even to talk about the plot. It's just his style.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking a lot of times people, audiobook community, we jump at the chance to hear our favorite celebrity or influencer narrate a book. That's one of the ways that you can search now. Search through Narrator because you love them and you can imagine them. But in this case, you're saying maybe not this person for this type of book. And I'm curious about that because, would you have been able to pick another person who would have maybe better narrated this book? Or in your case, more preferably?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked me this question because the other credit that I used was for Stephen King's book on writing, which is a book about writing. And guess who the
Right.
narrator of that one is? It's Stephen King. So
Amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, so then to hear him, reading his own book gave me a totally different experience, because now it's the author reading their own words. And I think that
Mm.
that brought, and I don't know if it's because I'm a Stephen King fanboy or not, probably, but I just found that it was a lot that him reading his own book was a lot more accessible to me and a lot more enjoyable. Not to take anything away from James Franco. I don't think that he's a bad guy, and I don't think that he's a bad narrator. It's just like, to me, he seemed a little bit miscast. It's like, when you read a book and you watch the television show or the movie, and you don't necessarily agree with the casting choice that they made for that character. I kind of felt the same way that I did with James Franco and The Dead Zone.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to be sending this episode to James Franco so that he can
Oh
take some
yeah, to
notes
his
and
fan club.
exactly. Your impressions on Audible itself. I'm not sure how much time you had to kind of navigate, but I am super intrigued to ask you that question, because most of the time when I'm having conversations with community members, it's people who've, we have our favorites, we've picked our platforms, we love, we compare, we contrast. But for you, you have used Audible as your first option, first choice. What do you think of the navigation? Did you play around with any of the bells and whistles like sleep timers and speeding up the book and all kinds of stuff, bookmarking, etc.?
Yeah, I did. I played with all of that because I downloaded it. Of course, you can listen to it on your laptop, but I downloaded the app onto my phone, and I did. I stopped it, I bookmarked it, came back. It worked well. I did the sleep timer as well to try it out, which was cool. You can do that with your podcast players as well. So that was neat. I didn't mess with the playback and speeding it up because I thought that, and I should have, because it was just for fun, but I didn't do that. I just stuck with the real time, because I do know, like, what do you prefer, Ramya, when you're listening? Do you do the 2 times or like 1.5 times? What's your
One
preferred
and
setting?
a half to
Okay.
1.75 is my general scope. Sometimes if a performer is more fast spoken, then I'll, turn down my speed up a bit. But you know,
Okay, yeah, because James Franco, his delivery was very slow and methodical. So I
sure.
probably could have sped him up a little bit.
And I wonder if that would have made a difference in the way that you took it in. Because when you read visually, you read pretty
Hmm.
fast, even with the
Hmm.
voice in your head. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so okay, that's really interesting. Now, browsing or searching up things, are you an algorithm person? Who takes in what Audible suggests for you, et cetera, or are you just going to go down the list of anything and everything available by Stephen King?
No, I'm going to move away from Stephen King. This was just like the test and to see how I like it, and I do like it. So I'm probably going to delve into historical stuff. I'm on this weird kick where it's all about nonfiction. You talked about Antarctica in the last podcast, and I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that. I actually just read a couple of books about Antarctica recently, so I'm a big fan of nonfiction right now. That's a phase I'm going through. That's probably more than a phase because it's been a few years now. But I'm going to head over that way, and I'm going to check out some travel books and historical travel books and probably Antarctic and Arctic exploration.
Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts as we kind of wrap up here on our discussion, mine and Nisreen's earlier, about people picking up more memoir, more candid accounts of their own stories, their own lives, whatever it is, where we feel like we can talk more openly about the heavier things that we're reading. Do you think that's new, Greg, or has it always been around in some way or shape?
Yeah, I think it's been around for a while, but I do think, I agreed with you when you were talking about it before. I think it's become more prevalent. I don't know. It seems as though because of the pandemic, we've all been at home, and so now we're maybe wanting to reach out to people and kind of understand what they're going through, depending on what it is. I've read Gene Simmons' memoir. I've read Paul Stanley's memoir. I most recently read Dave Grohl's memoir, and actually I might check that out and see if it's on Audible and see if he's the reader for that one, because I really, really enjoyed that. Yeah, I do like memoirs and biographies because it pulls back the curtain on those people. And in Dave Grohl's case, he talks very honestly about the things that he's gone through in life, and I found that really relatable. I thought he was a cool guy anyway, but now I feel as though I know him even more now.
So maybe we can go and find a James Franco memoir and then come back to the table with that when he's read his own story, huh?
We'll have the James Franco memoir, and it'll be read by Stephen King.
Right, exactly. Completely turn everybody on their heads. Greg, super awesome talking with you. I'm thinking that this is just the beginning, and next time we could do a catch up where you've had a bit more audiobook listening under your belt, and keep in touch.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Greg David, he's our communication specialist here at AMI, and of course his voice all around the network, here to talk audiobooks with us. Next week we'll be back with our friends from Sela Library, Karen McKay and Teresa Power. Until then, happy audiobook listening.
This was an AMI podcast. For more accessible media, visit ami.ca.